Welcome to the Equipped Agronomy Podcast, where we bridge the gap between seeding, equipment, and agronomy. Presented to you by Bourgault Industries. My name's Curtis DeGoyer, work as an agronomist here. And I am very excited today, trying this out again. We've got a guest online. You may have heard of him, Peter Johnson, aka Wheat Pete. Peter, welcome.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, Curtis. I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, we've got you've got a wealth of information about a certain subject we're going to be chatting about today. And yeah, it is going to be fun. We're going to dive into a few things and, just to introduce you, for those who don't know who you are. Agronomist at Real Agriculture, previously at, the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, or OMAFRA for short. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I spent 30 years with OMAFRA. Now it's now OMAFA. They've changed the name again. But regardless, with the Ministry of Agriculture and Food in the province of Ontario as their cereal specialist.
Okay.
So that's why my Twitter handle is Wheat Pete, because when it comes to cereals in Ontario, wheat is the big crop.
That's exactly it. And that is exactly what we're going to chat about today is wheat, and specifically, I guess, right, winter wheat. We've got, obviously a lot of spring wheat here in Western Canada, but I would say you are the expert on winter wheat. So that's what we're going to dive into. And just to kind of let everybody else know, if you're looking for information from Wheat Pete here, he's got the host of Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday, and a regular on the Wheat School. And what else am I missing? The Agronomists, all from Real Agriculture. So you can, if you want to keep listening to Wheat Pete, you can find him almost everywhere.
Absolutely. And if you have more questions, just fire them my way, right? It's on Twitter at Wheat Pete or Peter P. Johnson at realagriculture.com. I live on feedback, Curtis. So if they have more questions, fire them my way.
That's right. And we've had you up into Melfort, Saskatchewan, actually. That was a few years ago there. There was an event up here. We had you come up and chat and spread some of your info there. But, what are we doing today? What are we up to at Bourgault in general? As far as why are we looking at winter wheat? We've got a big market share for equipment in Western Canada, as well as Montana, North Dakota, where they do grow winter wheat. So why am I so interested in it now? And why am I going to find out some more information? And why do we want to learn more about it, right? And the answer to that is, as we're expanding, we're looking at different markets. We're getting into different areas. One being, where you're at right now is obviously in Ontario. And, trying to understand a little bit more of the agronomy of the crops that are there. And like we were chatting about before, like the winter wheat is a big crop over in Ontario.
100%.
Right? Fair to say?
Absolutely. It's the main cereal that we grow. But it's not just Ontario, right? I mean, we move into the States and winter wheat gets to be way more acres than spring wheat does. So if Curtis, you want to play in the big pool, you want to be able to do both winter wheat and spring wheat. And I think that's where we're headed.
That's exactly it. And you touched right into the area where we're really interested in, areas like Colorado and Kansas. Those are kind of our bigger markets that we're trying to get into more. And to that point, though, Ontario is a big place, right? We're talking here in Saskatchewan, we've got tons of snow. I'm looking at a bunch of snow out there. In other areas in Saskatchewan, there's no snow. It's the same thing in Ontario. And the point being, we have different weather patterns and different growing areas within even Ontario. But then we drop down into Kansas, and what the needs are down in Kansas or in Colorado are completely different from growing winter wheat in Ontario. Is that fair to say?
So the season is absolutely different. The agronomy is always the same. And so from an agronomic standpoint and, meeting the needs of the agronomy from the seeding equipment, it's pretty similar. There are differences for sure in terms of how dry is it, how much weight does it take to get that unit in the ground. What do we double shoot? Do we single shoot? Like what's our spread for seed bed utilization? Like there's differences, but the beauty, Curtis, the beauty of agronomy is that the agronomic principles apply whether you're in Kansas, you're in South Africa, you're in Pakistan. And actually, believe it or not, I talked to growers in South Africa and Pakistan about how to grow wheat better. And the principles apply. You just got to figure out, okay, it's a little different over there, and I'm not over there. So how do they apply differently?
Yeah, and I think that's a great starting point for us, right, is to say, okay, well, let's get some of the basics down. And then from that, and there's different areas, maybe we can tweak some different things. And on the equipment standpoint, what has been done, what has been working, and that's a great place to start. But I think I might ask you a few things on, like, let's look into a crystal ball. What could be done? Is there something that we can do? And I get it. We're not going to bring you on as the R&D. Well, maybe, I don't know. Maybe we'll be the R&D director here at Bourgault, and you can tell us exactly what drill we need to make, and that's going to be the one that's going to be the best for nutrient placement. But that's kind of our goal, right? Understand what has been, what is, what works good. Where are some improvements that could potentially be made? So I'm gonna leave that out there a little bit for you to kind of think about. But I want to get into, like you said, you laid down your base kind of agronomy. And I know you've got kind of your 5 main tips for winter wheat. I know I've listened to them before, and I thought I would bring them up a little bit and maybe just go through it and then ask a few questions into that, if that sounds good to you.
100%.
100%. So I was obviously trying to look up a few things. And, your number one thing, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, if you've changed this up a little bit, but planting date. Planting date is pretty important.
It's in winter wheat. It's critical. And in fact, I think in spring wheat, it's often critical as well. When you go west and you have that snow, you have that moisture. If you go into southern Alberta right now, Curtis, they planted spring wheat in southern Alberta. I believe the first was January 12th or something like that.
Yeah, there's a couple guys out there making some neighbors talk for sure. Yeah.
Yep. But the beauty of that is that early moisture, like one of the problems in a dry climate is if you don't have something there growing, you get evaporation of that moisture, right? And every little bit of moisture that evaporates is lost to the crop. The earlier you can seed, the better utilization you make of that early moisture. And so it sets you up for success. In winter wheat, it's a little different because I can actually seed too early. If we really seed super early, we can get into some fall disease issues, but you can manage early seeding with seeding rate because wheat yield comes down to heads per square meter, or if we're in the US, heads per square yard. And you would think, well, okay, in winter wheat, if I seed later, I just up my population to increase the number of heads per square meter. When I do that, I get more plant-to-plant competition, and I don't gain back the yield. In winter wheat, to make yield, you need the wheat plant to at least have a minimum of 2 tillers in the fall. And the really high-yield wheat growers, they'll get down as low as a 500,000 seed per acre planting rate, and they will get up to 10 tillers per plant. Now, not all of those 10 tillers necessarily make a head, but early planted wheat that has fall tillers for winter wheat is the high yield wheat. And that's why planting date is so critical. You have to get it in early enough that I get at least that 2 or 3 or 4 tillers in the fall, because that's where big yields come from.
Yeah, and I know that there was some discussions, so the earlier you can seed, the lower the seeding rate, the later you seed, maybe increase the seeding rate. Fair statement on that one. Yeah.
Yep.
And I know you had a good chat with a friend out in, England, I guess, there, right? And, 235 bushel. And he had a little different take on some stuff, didn't he?
Yeah. So Mark Stubbs is a very high yield wheat grower in the UK. And it's because they have blackgrass as the major weed problem. So blackgrass, for people in North America, they say, what's blackgrass? It's a winter annual foxtail. So wheat is a winter annual, right? And blackgrass, if you have heavy blackgrass pressure, it can take away at least 50% of your yield, maybe even 80 or 90% of your yield if it's super thick. But with blackgrass, it doesn't tend to germinate late in the fall. So one of the management strategies to beat it, because it's resistant to all their herbicides or almost all their herbicides. It's been a problem for years and it's developed herbicide resistance. And so in order to beat the blackgrass, Mark actually delays his seeding past what he would consider the optimum window to be. I mean, if he didn't have blackgrass, he would seed earlier at a lower population. But because he has blackgrass, he delays his seeding date. And when he does that, then he ups his population quite high, like much higher than I expected he would in the UK environment. But again, he's trying to
doing it for a reason.
Trying to get more heads. Right, yeah. Exactly. With
so
more
he was
seeds.
up to like, what over 1 million seeds per acre or something, wasn't he?
Yes. Oh, yeah. I think I'm just I'm struggling to remember, but he might even been up to like 1.4 or 1.5 million. Here in Ontario, in the right window, we would typically say that 1.5 million seeds per acre is the right seeding rate. But if I go 10 days early, and Curtis, one of the really interesting things is that growers in the fall, so if my optimum date, let's just use my farm. The optimum date for my farm is September the 25th. And so you would kind of say, well, if the optimum date is September the 25th, if it gets to be September the 29th, yeah, that's pretty good. Who cares? That 4 days, if you can imagine that 4 days, because we're in the warm part of the year, right? My daytime temperatures are still probably 20, 22, 25 Celsius. My nighttime temperatures are 10 Celsius. Those 4 days are 1 pillar per plant. And so remember, we want heads per square meter. Well, man, if I seed 350 seeds per square meter, which is sort of a fairly typical seeding rate, that gets us into that 1.5 million. Well, man, if I need, 1 tiller or 2 tillers per plant, and I'm 4 days later, I'm 1 tiller less. And so in terms of head count, it's massive.
Right.
Whereas as I move later, I get to October the 20th and versus October the 25th, it almost gets to be who cares, because it's so cold that nothing's doing anything anyway. And so those early days, every early day in that planting window is so incredibly critical. And a lot of people don't really understand that or think about that, because it's kind of like, oh, shoot,
a couple days,
25th there. Yeah, it's a couple of days. Who cares? No. It's a couple of days. Get the heck going.
Okay. No, very good to know. So what would you, and maybe you may or may not be familiar, like, so a person, let's say in Western Kansas, I'm not sure how familiar you are in that area. You said your seeding date is around September 25th. Any idea when that kind of optimum time is in let's say over Western Kansas general area?
So Western Kansas, again, a very dry climate, and it will depend a little bit on whether they're strictly for grain or whether they want to pasture the wheat as well as put it for grain. By the way, my rule is, Curtis, that you cannot be a record wheat grower and also graze the crop, right? I just don't believe that can happen, as much as I wish it could. But so you get to Western Kansas, and they're a bit warmer climate, but they're continental and they do get cool. So typically, I think they want to get the crop in the ground sometime in that mid-October time frame. And I'm not I don't want to say that 100% for sure, but when I've been there, that's sort of the dates that we've talked about. If you're going to graze it, they plant it a little bit earlier. If they're going only for grain, they try to hit that optimum window a little bit closer. And of course, a dry climate, so they're a lower seeding rate. They're rarely at 1.5 million because they don't typically have the moisture to support that high a population. Eastern Kansas, on the other hand, is much wetter than Western Kansas, and so they can use higher seeding rates because they have just higher yield potential.
So in Western Kansas, they might be down to how many seeds an acre?
Yeah, so oftentimes they're 1.1 million seeds per acre, 1 million seeds per acre, somewhere in that range. They may sneak it up as well if they get late.
Okay,
but you have to be a bit careful.
Okay, very neat. Learning lots already here. We did kind of tie into your number 1 planting date and number 3 seeding rate. I guess they're pretty connected there.
Exactly. The one affects the other. Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. So your number 2 on your list here, starter fertilizer. And this one is a little bit dear to us here in a seeding equipment side of things. So starter fertilizer, important or not important? I think I know the answer, but
yeah. The reason it's number 2 is because it's the second most important thing to the winter wheat crop, and I think to the spring wheat crop as well. Every crop is really fascinating, and when I went to school, I was taught that phosphorus is important to grass crops, potash is important to broadleaf crops. So with soybeans, it's potash. With corn, it's phosphorus. Man, we've moved so far past that, Curtis. If you have low potash on a soil test and you're planting corn and you don't address the low potash and you just power the phosphorus to it, guess what? You've thrown all those dollars on phosphorus away because the corn's short potash, it can't use that phosphorus. Wheat. There's 3 things from a fertility perspective that are important to wheat in the fall. It's called phosphorus, phosphorus, and phosphorus. And even spring wheat, when we go to Western Canada, if you talk to AgVise labs out there, they'll say that only 15% of the time do they see any response to potash in spring wheat. Here in Ontario, we've done trials and man, potash hardly matters to the wheat crop, which is phenomenally interesting because wheat takes up a tremendous amount of potash, right? And you say, how can it not matter? It just must be really efficient at pulling that potash out of the ground because we almost get 0 response to potash on winter wheat. On the other hand, phosphorus on a heavy clay soil with a low soil test, I can double my yield with a starter phosphorus band on winter wheat. And in fact, I talked to my great friend Al McCollum. He's a super agronomist on the heavy clay soils of Elgin County here in Ontario. So that's London, St. Thomas area, if people want to know kind of the area that is. And he said, man, the winter wheat this year looks great. I'm driving along, it looks great. And then I see a grower that I know doesn't use starter phosphorus, and that wheat looks tough. So, yeah, it's the number 2 thing, 100%.
And then, so on that note, Ontario, many guys are using starter phosphorus now. What would be the percentage, do you think?
Oh, it's very high.
Okay.
I mean, they have to listen to Wheat Pete beat them over the head with this, like for 40 years.
40 years,
for 40 years. So I don't know. It's very high, but yeah.
So then my question then too, and again, pulling on if you have experience there or not, but we'll go back to Kansas, Western Kansas, Eastern Kansas. I went through there. It didn't seem like there was very much starter phosphorus going on. And maybe it was just a few people I talked to, but would that be a fair statement or what's your look at it?
Yeah, so phenomenally interesting about that, Curtis, is that about 5 years ago, the University of Kansas did a bunch of trials with starter phosphorus on wheat. And guess what they found?
It helped.
The exact same thing as it is here, that starter phosphorus has a massive impact on the outcome of the winter wheat crop. Interesting, like here in Ontario, if I use starter phosphorus, I gain 1 tiller per plant, as long as I plant in a time frame that gives the plant a chance to make that tiller. So if my optimum planting date is September 25th, if I plant with and without starter phosphorus on September 25th, the with phosphorus, by the time winter comes, will have 1 tiller more per plant. Mm-hmm. And like just massive yield gain from that perspective, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same in Kansas. So if the Kansas guys aren't doing that, you can really help them, Curtis. Take those Bourgault drills down there and either whether it's mid-row banders or it's seed placed, it works.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting one there too, and that's where we're hoping to get some trials again. And I know the University of Kansas State there have been doing some, and we're hoping to get a little bit more trials in there as well. And that was the one thing, that we wanted to play with that. So then you mentioned mid-rows on there too. Do you think it is important to get it in the seed row, or is it okay to get it in, we'll say mid-row or even sideband? Just get phosphorus down at time of seeding, or does it have to be right in the seed row, do you think?
So a mid-row bander on a 10-inch row drill, is not going to get the phosphorus there fast enough, likely on winter wheat.
Right.
Because the roots have to reach there. And, to get 5 inches takes some time. A side band, I think, works fine. And right with the seed, we know works, unless, of course, you get too much there and you get salt injury. Again, all these agronomic principles apply.
We won't be able to go into them all. Yes, there's a few things we're going to generalize for sure there. Generally, then, what are most guys putting down in the seed row? 7.5 inch spacing, say.
So 7.5 inch spacings, our standard rate is 100 pounds of MAP. So 100 pounds per acre of 11-52-0. And then what's interesting is that rate response, phosphorus is expensive this year. So if you go to 50 pounds of 11-52-0, our data would say that on average, that's 6.5 bushels per acre. The 100 pounds is only 7.5 bushels per acre. So on a 1 year basis, you can say, well, 50 pounds is enough. Long term, we have to maintain soil test, and 100 pounds maintains soil test, and it just works, right? So that's typically the target for us.
Okay, yeah, and there could be some guys saying, "Wow, we got drier conditions. We're sitting in eastern Colorado, whatever, right?" Yeah, of course, you got to adjust for your seeding conditions at that time and the moisture you have. So it would be probably a fair thing to say on that one. Okay. A few other nutrients I want to ask about. So potash, we know we've seen some potash in our spring wheat up here where we've seen deficiencies. We're pretty low in some areas in this St. Bruce, Saskatchewan specifically. We've got some issues, and I've seen some responses to potash, but maybe that's that 15% we fall under. So interesting on that one. I wouldn't have guessed that potash doesn't play as big a role as I thought maybe in winter wheat.
Yeah, well, and so I think it's like anything, Curtis. You can't go to zero, right?
Yes.
And if you're on a lighter soil, you're probably going to see more potash response, and to have a little bit of potash in there never hurts.
Right.
But
it's not a for sure happen. It doesn't have to happen right away. Not like phosphorus. I think that's the big thing, right?
The big win is phosphorus. The occasional win is potash. Yes. Yeah.
What about sulfur?
Yeah, so sulfur, such an interesting nutrient because until 2010, here in Ontario, we didn't get sulfur response because we had so much out of the atmosphere.
Yep.
Since 2010, sulfur has become a really big deal. We don't typically apply much sulfur in the fall because the demand is low, but there's some really intriguing work going on with sulfur. So first off, remember that if you apply MAP 11-52-0 or DAP, right? If you're in the US and it's 1846 instead of 11-52, there is some sulfur that contaminates, or it goes, I shouldn't say contaminates, goes along for the ride, because in that process they use sulfur. So there can be 1 to 3% sulfur in those phosphorus fertilizers that they don't tell you about. So you get a little bit of sulfur for free. However, we look at the new research coming out of Michigan State, and so Kurt Steinke there has actually found that he's getting at least as good, and maybe numerically, not statistically, but numerically, another 2 or 3 added bushels by applying his sulfur late in the fall rather than early in the spring. And so with sulfur, we know that the wheat crop demand for sulfur in the spring is extremely high. It's one of the first nutrients that the wheat crop needs. And so as much as I don't want sulfur to be lost over the winter, sulfur doesn't leach the way nitrogen does. And so again, this is another learning that we're kind of coming into. So I think you can fall apply sulfur and get benefit out of it in the spring, or you apply that sulfur super early in the spring to meet that early crop demand. We need sulfur, and it's best if it's applied early, and we don't seem to lose it over the winter, so that's maybe okay as well.
Okay, that's, that one, sulfur, most guys, spring wheat doesn't really apply sulfur too often. There's a lot more elemental, I would say, going down where, just trying to build up the sulfur levels as they release in general over the years. Lots of canola here, right? And so we put it in for canola, and then it gives a little residual for the other crops.
Yeah, 100%. And that is the beauty of sulfur in Western Canada is it doesn't disappear over the winter, right? You're dry enough, it doesn't disappear over the winter, where we're not quite that fortunate here in Ontario.
Right. And then probably down into Kansas, Colorado as well. It might work.
They're dry.
Yeah, it won't leak there.
So fall sulfur is going to work. Just remember, if you do apply elemental sulfur, that the particle size of that sulfur is really quite important. And so if, Tiger 90 is the cheapest form of sulfur, but Dan Kaiser's work out of Minnesota says it takes 6 years for that sulfur to really become available. So if you need it this year and you put on Tiger 90 in the fall, you may be disappointed. Just watch out.
That's a good watch out. Yeah. Okay. Couple other fertilizer ones I want to touch on. Obviously the big one, nitrogen. And this one, for applying nitrogen, again, we talked about mid-rows. Okay, just a quick story for your info there. We do hybrid fall rye here up in St. Brew. And I've done some trials before. And again, we're cold for basically half the year, frozen ground. So I've done trials where I've placed nitrogen in the mid-row at the time of seeding in the fall. And then I've compared that to a split between putting some in the fall, some in the spring. And then I put it all in the spring. And what I found over a couple of years there was like, it didn't matter actually between the split. So what you ended up with, yes, it took more in the fall to get it down, but then you didn't trample the crop and you didn't have to broadcast another application in the spring for that crop. And it's been working good for us. So that's actually what some guys have been doing. And that's what we actually have some fall rye in right now, and where all the nitrogen's down. The last, a year or two ago, the first activity on that field was the combine. We didn't have to spray or nothing like that. So that's where I'm kind of coming at it. Like, I wonder, is there any crossover into winter wheat? And I think this is going to be very, very area specific, but maybe you would have some more insight at, applying a good chunk of nitrogen, maybe not all nitrogen, but maybe all nitrogen at the time of seeding. Have you heard of anyone doing that? Does anyone ever do that? Or is that just crazy?
Oh gosh, and you go to Kansas and that's quite common. They would put it all on in the fall. But some excellent work by Romulo Lolato out of Kansas State University. And he clearly showed that if you put all your nitrogen on in the fall on winter wheat in Kansas, that you are going to get less nitrogen use efficiency and lower protein in the grain. So in Kansas, we're growing hard red winter wheat. We need that protein. You will get much better nitrogen utilization if you put, I believe his number was he put 40% on in the fall, and then he put, I think it was 40% on early spring, and he actually in that work came back and put 20% on later. I'd have to look at that data to know the exact percentages, but it's something like that. But the difference, same amount of total nitrogen. And if I recall correctly, the all fall nitrogen application, he got about 70 pounds of that applied nitrogen into the crop. With the split application, he got 120 pounds of nitrogen into the crop. Like the nitrogen uptake was massively different. And so in rye, we don't care about protein, right?
That's right.
And so like if we get low protein rye, I don't care so much. And so I think if you're going after protein, some splits might not be an all bad idea. And we see that here in Ontario as well. If we're going for protein on hard red winter, because we do grow some, then we will definitely split nitrogen. If I'm soft red where protein doesn't matter, one and done is pretty common.
Okay, that's some stuff to chew on there. And yeah, I will follow up with some of that research there. So that is that's one I've been wondering about. So I think that's some good information. I appreciate that. We're kind of getting to the end here. We've gone over a little bit, but man, it's been great chatting. To follow up on your last couple points, we talked about seed rate. This is one, fall weed control. I mean, it's something that the drills, not necessarily right with us, but to grow a good crop, I think it's important.
Yeah.
You'll say?
Oh, yeah. So fall weed control, if you really want high yield wheat, fall weed control is critical because it's the weeds that grow with the wheat crop right when it breaks dormancy in the spring that cause yield loss. So it's interesting. If I have dandelions growing with my winter wheat crop in the fall, they don't do very much because it's not really setting its yield potential. But then when it breaks dormancy on, we'll say March the 20th, just to use a date, well, it's now going to set its yield potential very quickly, head size, number of tillers, and the dandelions probably started growing before the wheat started growing, or the chickweed, or the shepherd's purse, or the fleabane, right? Any of those winter annuals or perennials, and it's way too cold to go kill them. And so by the time it's warm enough to kill them in late April or early March, or early May rather, the damage is done. And so I can't fix my yield loss in the spring. So fall weed control is absolutely critical in winter wheat.
Yeah, for that early, breaking dormancy. You can go in and of course spray the weeds out, but like you said, the yield potential is lost. You're doing it for cosmetic almost.
So it's really interesting. Peter Sikkema has some research on that, where he controlled fleabane in the fall. He only got 80% control. Where he controlled fleabane in the spring, he got 98% control. But the fall application yielded, I believe, was 10 bushels per acre more than the spring application, even though there was more weeds in the fall stuff, because there wasn't weeds there. Fleabane germinates all year long, basically, and it wasn't there when the wheat set its yield potential.
Good to know. That's very. I don't know if everybody really appreciated that. So that's some good info. Last one on your list. This one pertains to the drill. Seeding depth. What's your ideal seeding depth? And this is probably standard. You could say this is almost every area's, right? Doesn't matter where for a seed depth for the most part, or what say you?
Yeah, no. So Curtis, for sure. I mean, you have to go to moisture. So that is, I mean, we go to Kansas, and if you ask me the perfect seeding depth for wheat, it's 1 inch. It's really tough, even with your good Bourgault drills, to get every seed at 1 inch. So we're going to go to 1.25 inches or 1.5 inches because I want at least 1 inch deep on every seed. But if I'm in Kansas or I'm in Colorado or I'm in Idaho and it's super dry, and I may have to go to 3 inches to find moisture. And I should, I want to find moisture if I can. Mm-hmm. But there's limits to how deep I can go. But if I have moisture, kind of that 1 inch to 1.5 inches is perfect, because that means the crown sets as deep as it can in the soil, and I get those roots to anchor it and keep it in the ground so it doesn't get frost heaved out. And also the growing point as much protection from cold weather by that 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch of soil that's on top of the crown as well.
Awesome. No, I think that's at least 1 inch deep, and yeah, deeper if you have to. That's kind of what I'm hearing from there. So, okay. You know what? We're going to have to end it there. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing this wealth. And again, if anyone wants to reach out to you, you've got your website, wheatpete.com. Is that?
Yes.
Wheatpete.com.
Correct.
And of course your podcast. Google you'll show up, eh?
100%.
You'll show up on there.
Really appreciate it, Curtis. I apologize I went a little bit long, but I'm passionate about wheat, man. I can't help it.
No, I appreciate you coming on, and I know I learned a lot, so hopefully the listeners did too. And with that, why don't you have the sign off? I don't have a good sign off, so why don't you give your wheat school sign off, and we'll go from there.
Whatever you do, grow great wheat.